Now we continue with the topic of cryptocurrencies, and the next speaker is a crypto evangelist. He's a multi-entrepreneur. He teaches the history of cryptocurrencies, and he's also writing a book. So let's give a warm welcome to David Stancel from Blockchain Slovakia.
That's okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I hope you are not too tired. Is anybody here who likes history a little bit? Okay, cool. Because I do as well, especially the one related to the cryptocurrencies. And when I was preparing this talk, I was thinking for long, how to approach this, because there are so many interesting things that happen throughout the history of cryptocurrencies, and so at the time that we can actually talk about this stuff. So, actually, I don't have a clicker. Cool. So when I say history, I really mean this pre-Bitcoin era. And I believe it starts with the invention of the asymmetric encryption. Probably the story that before that, when two parties wanted to communicate to each other, they had to share the secret key, and that was kind of a problem. And does anybody remember these three gentlemen or recognizes them? It's like Ralph Merkle, Martin Hellman, and Whitfield Diffie. So they had been thinking for a very long time to know how we can eliminate this necessity of having the third secret shared key. And in the end, in 1976, they published their seminal work, The New Directions in Cryptography. And this was very important from the historical perspective, because it was like the first time when actually the public had access to really strong cryptography. And their work carried the message, and the spirit of rebellion because of the multiple reasons. And first of all, it was because of this almost an heretic idea of a public key that can be shared with anybody. It was at the time quite controversial. And in fact, when Ralph Merkle, a few months before this, submitted his concept of what later became known like Merkle puzzle, he submitted it into one of the cryptographic magazines. He got declined because it wasn't in line with the mainstream cryptographic thinking. And this is kind of a first note, or like a first point to know that, like academia might be sometimes like really resistant, to the very unusual and unconventional ideas. Another reason why their work we can consider like to be really brave and bold is because the field where this happened, this breakthrough. Because back then in the 70s, anything related to cryptography was largely dominated by the three letters agencies like NSA, and kind of all kinds of activities and developments outside of their scope were discouraged. And so we have this, the key concepts and cryptographic primitives emerge in the 70s and 80s, and then we have the first attempts to design digital currencies in the 90s, and a lot of research had been going on in the multiple areas within the computer science, in like the public cryptography, elliptic curves, and file sharing systems. Some of you may remember companies like Napster. Anybody? Few. Cool. And from this kind of stuff, we again learned some valuable lessons, especially with the Napster. If you remember it, you also maybe remember the problems that were associated with the company like this once they became really successful and impactful. Because of the centralized architecture, it was easy for governments to control them, ban and restrict them. And so we learned very important lessons about the importance of decentralization. And we had lots of very other interesting ideas emerge, like B-money, Bitcoin, and so on. And also this one. Does anybody know who are these people? It's probably the first and probably most famous instance of digital currencies in 1990. A company called DigiCash, founded by the famous cryptographer David Chaum, based in Netherlands. And for the first few years, the company was considered to be quite a success, because even though they utilized the banking infrastructure, they allowed for completely anonymous transactions, which was very cool for the time. They had a bunch of different partnerships with banks in the United States, in Europe. They received a bunch of really interesting acquisition offers from companies like Microsoft. You know, they wanted to integrate them into the Windows 95, but it didn't happen. And the company in the end went bankrupt. And when you talk, probably some of the people that worked and were involved with the company, they might tell you various opinions like why this was the case with the company. And partially, some of the ideas or like theories are that it was to some extent because of the leadership style, maybe of the management, or even particularly David Chom. And again, we had the opportunity to learn again a lesson that about the importance of decentralization when it comes to the governance as well. And there were lots of many interesting concepts that emerged at the time, in the 90s. But for some of them, it was simply too soon. And in the end, after some time, they kind of became, you know, like forgotten, and they stayed there unappreciated for a longer time. And this is something that we've been repeatedly seeing, not only in the cryptocurrency space, but in also other areas as well. And that's another hint for us to learn from, that it might be really sometimes worth to kind of revisit the old ideas. And when you are working on technological concepts, problems, issues, challenges, it might even help you to recognize the possibility that you don't even maybe need a breakthrough to solve it, but some of this stuff may be hidden in the old research ideas. Because we know the same thing actually happened with Bitcoin itself, right? Because when Satoshi came in 2008, he introduced the Bitcoin as a concept. And Bitcoin didn't really become successful because it would be cutting edge in any of its concepts. But Satoshi managed to combine like really old ideas and technologies that had been known for 10 or even 20 years, and he combined them in a very unique way. We had the proof of work concept for a decade, even more. And but Satoshi, he combined it and he used it like was the first one to use it as a tool for a peer-to-peer network to reach consensus. And that was the revolution behind Bitcoin. And there is another valuable thing that we should be aware of it. We should be aware of again relates to the academia. That academics oftentimes have really troubles and difficulties to sell their inventions and innovations. And this was, for example, the original researchers of the proof of work concept don't get any credit for Bitcoins. And this is mainly because their work wasn't known outside of the academic circles. So probably some of you in here and in the cryptocurrency community know the concepts of Hashcash, by Adam Back. But the truth is that there are even few people, many years before him, that invented the concept of proof of work, and we don't know about them. So it really helps, from the academic perspective, to get in touch with real life, and it not only reduces the reinvention, but it might be also really a source of fresh ideas. Okay. Another thing, so we had the 90s, and we had this period that is often referred to as crypto wars. We had this society clash when we had, on one hand, the US government proposing laws and regulations that would limit access of the public to the strong encryption. And on the other hand, we had the rise of digital privacy groups like extropians, cypherpunks, and Electronic Frontier Foundation, and organizations like that. And they had been advocating for anonymity and privacy tools as a very basic and important concept of a civil society, because it advanced the individual freedom and liberty. And if you go through the mailing list of cypherpunks and you read the conversations, you probably notice that there is for many years an ongoing debate, how to effectively advocate for these changes in our society. And you might be familiar with their iconic motto, we write the code. But the truth is that actually the code itself, it might be really powerful, but it's not enough. And I think a really good example and manifestation of it is actually the story of the creator of a PGP. Somebody knows PGP? Like the Phil Timmerman. So he was kind of he embodied all the ideas that cypherpunks were fighting for, because in 1991 he was like relentlessly working on the source code of PGP to release it as soon as possible. He missed out like 5 mortgage payments because he was just really working on this, and so he did it. And once it did, it kind of started to spread around the internet. And back then crypto was classified as an export restricted munition, so this was not really okay to do from a legal perspective. And he soon found out that the release of the code was very powerful, but it was by far not enough. And then the organizations like EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, came along that really helped him out, and they covered all the legal battles and the lawsuits he had, and they really helped to activize like the whole these digital privacy groups and create the social pressure that in the end resulted in kind of that we won the crypto wars, I would say, to some extent. And actually this quote here is actually the quote from the Philip Timmerman himself when he was asked like what does he think about cypherpunks, And I think it says a lot that and because we can see the heritage of this kind of radical ideas and this rebellion spirit present also until these days in the cryptocurrency space, and especially in some of the communities, some of them more, some of them a little bit less, but it's still there. And there is another aspect and dimension to this, and especially also kind of a lesson for lawmakers and policymakers, that you definitely don't want to have the prohibitive rules on crypto, because you don't want to end up like UK in late 19th century when they introduced the Red Flag Act, which introduced this very stupid law that when you had hey guys, okay. So when we had the vehicle, we had to have a guy walking in front of it with a red flag, kind of warning the environment that something really dangerous is coming along. And as a result of this, the whole focus of the automotive industry shifted away to other countries, like Germany. I don't know if it's my fault. I hope not. Sorry for that. So that's definitely, again, valuable lesson for regulators, that you don't want to really restrict crypto, and I guess that's why also aeternity is, for example, based in Liechtenstein and not in China. And probably the last thing that I want to stress out is that, and I think many of us in the cryptocurrency space are guilty of it, that we tend to underestimate the social aspect of these technologies. And I don't even want to go much deeper into that. And if I just mention, if you just think of stuff like the Bitcoin block size debate, oftentimes it was more about who is releasing the code and not the code itself. Or if we talk about the DAO hack, a few years ago, it's like what, 3 years ago now. In the end, it was about kind of a social consensus and not really consensus on a technological level. And therefore, just to summarize some of the key points, we really need to have these crazy and unconventional ideas. We definitely also need these crazy people who will be able to execute them. And yes, the software is super powerful tool to change and to bring the change into society, but alone it's not enough. And I think the really final and most important thing that we can learn from the history of cryptocurrencies is that we should really learn it, and we should really go and see and really deliberately study it, because there are really lots of hidden treasures there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Do you have any questions for David?
Huh?
We have some more time.
Cool.
Okay. Two questions. Okay.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. That was a lot about the past and the present. What about the future? I mean, there is projects like decentralized space agency. There's projects like numerous futuristic ideas. How do you feel, or how do you see that crypto and the consensus protocols that we are having are going to help us out with the governance of whatever future is going to look like?
Phew, that's a tough question, but a good one. I probably don't think that it's the consensus protocols that will help us with the governance. That's like what I was trying to kind of say, that I think in the end it's more about, it's still about the off-chain governance, if you will. That's about the people and all these teams behind it, because I think that's still more powerful than the technological aspect of the consensus protocols.
Hi. So building on this,
Hi.
are you writing your book to educate about the off-chain sense?
Yeah, there was a link there before. Yes, I'm working on the book that would compile all this stuff, like the whole history from the inception of asymmetric encryption, compiling all the important ideas and the attempts to design digital currencies in the 90s, to the emergence of Bitcoin and the evolution of cryptocurrencies, including all kinds of smart contract platforms and stuff like that. And I will be also releasing a website with that, which will be like compiling all the resources related to cryptocurrencies in general. So it will be like a GitHub repo, so you can commit some changes and contribute some resources, and it will be reflected on the website directly. So if some of you know people like James Lobb, he has like really nice like Bitcoin, like a page with Bitcoin resources. Some intend to do something similar, but it will be probably like more open source in the sense that people can contribute, and it will be much broader because it will be covering like basically all kinds of ideas related to not only cryptocurrencies but underlying technology like cryptographic primitives and stuff like that.
Okay,
Cool.
thank you, David Stancel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.